Question is, what is culture? The reason I'm asking this is that it sounds as if the Canadiens didn't have a culture before this rebuild. Is that an indictment of the previous regime? Is it an indictment of the legacy that Weber and Carey Price couldn't leave when they left? If culture is so important to success, how come Pittsburgh, with a winning culture instilled by their future Hall of Famers, are struggling to make things work? Is culture just a lazy buzzword being used when it's convenient to justify a team's success? Is it 2024's character? Good question,
Oh,
Daniel.
I'm sure that I'm sure there are people who think that culture is a lazy buzzword. I don't, but it's like culture is a bit like culture is a bit like pornography, right? So it's hard to describe, but when you see it, you know what it is. So,
Yeah.
So culture, I think that the Weber and Price aspect to the component of your question is really relevant, because that was the prime bet that Marc Bergevin made when he acquired Weber, when he extended Price. He said the impact of those guys and their impact on the culture of this
When
team
he extended Gallagher.
will be felt long after they're gone.
Mm-hmm.
That was his mindset, and I was ready to believe him, because basically you have veterans that are so respected that they establish a work ethic, a mindset, a level of preparation to their game that influences younger teammates, and in their turn they copy those habits, and so the wheel turns. That's the idea. But the problem is that the minute that Weber and Price left, that culture went out the door too. So it did not carry over the way that it was expected. And I think that I don't know if there was just beyond those two guys, if there was just a lack of leadership, not enough guys to carry the pole and make an effective transition. But it's definitely one of the factors why the drop was so huge between a somewhat unexpected presence in the Stanley Cup final. But certainly, I think that culture played a role in how they managed to rally and against the Leafs and had that long run in the playoffs. But the fact that they started from there and they dropped all the way down at the bottom of the standings, I think that the fact that the culture did not carry over had something to do with it. So I'm not going to sit here and say culture is overrated or culture doesn't exist. I think that it does. I think that's what Martin St. Louis is trying to implement this season. But it's also the fact that it starts from the top, from your coaching staff that is selling ideas and concepts and ways of behaving that is sustained by younger leaders that are there for the long while, that adhere to those concepts and those ideas. I think that it makes something that is probably stronger than just asking one guy that's been transplanted from one organization to another to say, here, you're going to be our culture. I'm not sure if one guy was enough, and I'm talking here about Shea Weber, to really have such a big impact, and once he was gone, he would carry over, because evidently it did not.
No, it's worth pointing out that there are only 6 players remaining on this team that played in the 2021 Stanley Cup final. Jake Evans, Brendan Gallagher, Nick Suzuki, Cole Caulfield, Yoel Armia, and Josh Anderson. So that's a remarkable turnaround in less than 3 years. So I think that also has something to do with it to some extent. But you know, when I think Daniel's point about the Penguins is fair. You know, you can have the best culture in the world. It loses every time to Father Time. Father Time is undefeated, as we like to say. But the opposite end of it, I think, is also true. In terms of a bad culture, like the Buffalo Sabres, for instance. I remember talking to Kyle Okposo about this at the beginning of last season, and him just really passionately talking about the need to, remove some elements who maybe aren't bought in as well. Hint, hint. Rhymes with Bikel, kind of thing. So it's like,
Yeah.
um, and but just how difficult it is to cultivate it, how difficult it is to create that element in your team that has everybody pulling on the same rope, that has everyone going in the same direction. That team needed Rasmus Dahlin to take a step. Uh, and they're still not out of it, And so, like, I think it can be a buzzy word, but I think it's a real thing when you're trying to go through a rebuild and you're used to losing a lot. That paying attention to culture, paying attention to complacency, paying attention to accepting loss, accepting losing is important, and it's something that organizations have to really be mindful of. And I really do think the Canadiens are mindful of it. I think Nick Suzuki in particular, but Cole Caulfield as well. The guys, those are the two young guys out of the six guys I mentioned who have been here who played in the 2021 Cup final. They're the two core guys, right? I mean, Gallagher and Anderson's contract makes them de facto core guys, I guess, but the core guys are Cole Caulfield and Nick Suzuki. And I think the organization is sensitive to them getting sick of this. And it's important to be sick of this. And that's the kind of thing, like, it's hard not to look at the situation in Buffalo where it was more of the same year after year after year. I think it'd be human nature at some point to just be like, you know what? We're just not very good. We're not going to be very good. This is just how it is. So we're going to lose a lot. And, maybe not consciously think that, but subconsciously be like, where is the end of this road? What is happening here? How do we get to the next step? That has something to do with culture. I mean, that's, right now, whereas Shea Weber and Carey Price were the main purveyors of that culture before, that's Marty now. That's Marty's domain. That's where and Trevor Letesky brought it up, how they talked about it Saturday before the game. The culture that they've built here. Well, now it's time to see that culture in action. It didn't work out Saturday night, but as we mentioned off the top of the show, we're going to see to what extent that culture is there without the main purveyor of it being there. So I think that's culture. I think the culture term is a buzzword, but what it means is not buzzy. It means just creating a set of standards. You have standards as an organization, you have standards as a team, you have standards as a dressing room, and it's up to the people in that dressing room to uphold those standards. And that's what culture is. It's a set of standards that you adhere to, and not letting them slip is how you maintain a culture.
When you look at either Martin St. Louis or Kent Hughes, I think, and probably even Jeff Gorton, there's a great deal of admiration towards what the Boston Bruins have been able to do over time. Mm-hmm. When you talk about a culture that's been able to transmit itself, from the group that won the Stanley Cup, from the Zdeno Chara years to Patrice Bergeron taking over, and now Patrice Bergeron being gone, and the standards remain so high in Boston, despite the fact that on paper it's not as strong a team as it once was. Mm-hmm. Brad Marchand has been able to perpetuate that idea. Now you've got other leaders like McAvoy and Pasternak also that have joined in, but they've been able, Marty says occasionally, we want to instill a type of play and a type of culture that whoever you put in, they'll jump on the train. Even if the train is ongoing, they'll be able to join in and participate. They won't be lost because there's something that's clear and that is identifiable to the Montreal Canadiens. And I think that in that sense, the Boston Bruins are a very good example of that, because that continuous level of excellence is started with a strong culture that's been able to be passed on. And it's funny because it changed from players to players, but it also it was cultivated from one coach to another.
Yeah.
Because it went from Claude Julien to Cassidy, now to Montgomery. So that's pretty impressive, and I think that's what the Canadiens are aspiring to accomplish. Because teams with bad culture, you mentioning Buffalo, I know that the Nashville Predators at some point went to a patch where a rough patch where they thought that their culture really needed to be fixed. You look at Columbus, they really struggle with that.
Ottawa, same
Ottawa,
thing.
Yeah. So those teams, there's a correlation at some point. Not every bad team is bad because of its culture, but some teams don't figure it out because they cannot implement a positive culture despite their best efforts. So it's a riddle.
And just final point on this, but just because a good culture expires at some point, like Daniel mentioned, Pittsburgh, doesn't mean that it's not important. It's just that everything expires at some point. I had time to, I sat down with John Cooper when the Canadiens were in Tampa. That's another instance of, John Cooper's been there throughout. He's been the constant, but players have come and gone there. They've been kind of ravaged by the salary cap in Tampa, but that's a winning culture that another one that Marty has mentioned that they would like to emulate in Montreal. But, everything has an expiry date. You can't just, winning culture is not just going to endlessly perpetuate itself, but there's no way you could make the argument that that the culture in Tampa did not in some way contribute to their incredible run of success over a 5-year period. That's real. Yes, they had excellent players. Yes, they had excellent management. They manipulated the salary cap brilliantly. They had an excellent coach. They had a lot of factors go in their favor, but Julien Brisebois made a lot of trades and they brought in a lot of people over those years, and they just entered into the fold and began swimming upstream with the rest of the school of fish. It was really, and that's what culture is. That's what it's about.
Yeah.
Is what the Lightning have done and the Bruins have done. The Bruins, like, one of their primary forwards now is Pavel Zacha, they got him kind of as a cast off from New Jersey, and boom, he enters into the Bruins culture, is actually a perfect player for the way they play. Doesn't skip a beat, it's Danton Heinen's like an incredibly effective player in Boston, whereas he was kind of a middle six, borderline bottom six guy elsewhere, fits perfectly there. Tampa's, frankly, the way things are shaping out this year, like if you finish first in the Eastern Conference, the way it's looking like the Florida Panthers will do, like, what kind of reward would it be if they wind up getting the Tampa Bay Lightning? Right now, it's not looking like that's going to be the case. Like, Tampa's probably going to get the winner of the Metropolitan. Although the Rangers could pass Florida and Boston. Boston's actually technically first in the East right now. But whoever gets Tampa in the first round, you will have had one hell of a season, like a great season. Either you've won the Metropolitan or you've won the Atlantic. Maybe you finished first in the Eastern Conference, and your reward is the Tampa Bay Lightning in the first round of the playoffs. Like, what is that all about? And good luck with that. Like, good luck with that. Seriously, like, I'm not a betting guy. I don't pay attention. The people who are, depending on what the odds are, I would throw a little bit down on Tampa. It's in whatever series they wind up in. Like, it's not a bad bet. And the reason for that is their culture. That's what it's about. That's why I think it's not a bad bet.